Welcome to Never Too Early, a YouTube series focused on unconventional talent insights for founders. I'm Lauren Ipsen, talent partner at Decibel, and this is my founder therapy series. Today, I am super excited to introduce my guest, Jonathan Schneider. Jonathan is the founder of Moderne, formerly was at Pivotal Software, and before that, Netflix, and is a US Army alum. We're diving into some really critical topics today that every business leader and operator should be thinking about, from multi-year deals to pricing strategy overall, and knowing when to fight versus when to fold. So I'm super excited to introduce you to Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Really excited to have you here. And I think this is going to be a super critical session for so many of our founders. So thank you for joining us.
Of course. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Let's start from the beginning. I would love to just hear a little bit about yourself and if you kind of always knew that you'd be a founder one day.
I'm definitely not the kind of founder that's set out to like build a company. What are
Mhm.
the like put a bunch of ideas on a whiteboard? What's the thing I think could build? I think there was a lot of things that led to this point that kind of dragged uh both myself and our Moderne's co-founder Olga Kunzich into this. I think it started in terms of this technology. It started back at Netflix for me. I was working on engineering tools,
Mhm.
and there was only a couple of us on that team. There was about 700 engineers, I believe, at the time. They had that freedom and responsibility culture. If you've read the old Netflix culture deck V1,
Mhm.
which meant as a central team we couldn't impose any constraints on what product engineers did. So it was a little bit special. We were trying to get them to move forward, like adopt more recent language versions and frameworks and things like that, trying to provide them context about where they were relative to where we wanted them to be wasn't enough to make them move forward. If I would talk to product teams, they would say, do it for me, otherwise I got something else to do. So there was that early kind of signal of like, okay, I think there's some automation that's necessary here.
Mhm.
And then I had gone on to Pivotal VMware, and Olga and I, that's where we met. We were working with large enterprises doing something, an unrelated product, and we kept hearing this pain point. And so it kind of got dragged out of us.
Cool. Awesome. I love it. So ultimately the company itself and the idea kind of found you more than, hey,
That's
this
right.
is I'm
That's right.
destined to be a CEO one day.
That's right.
Cool.
That's right.
So now you embarked on this journey and you are in this seat. How's it been? How's it been going?
It's been so interesting. I'm an engineer by background. We're actually both technical founders, but we find such interest in, layering together the technical engineering with social engineering, with pricing engineering, as I think we'll talk about it a little bit, and the relationship between all those things. I think it's just so much more enriching and fascinating than just um, working only on the product. So it's a great opportunity to do that, and
Yeah,
I wouldn't do anything else.
I love it. Cool. So, as discussed today, we're going to talk a lot around pricing specifically.
Yes,
And it's something that I think so many of our founders, especially our deeply technical founders, come up against and really don't
yes,
know where to start. So, I'm excited to get some of your insight based on what you've seen and what you've seen work successfully and maybe some things that weren't so successful too.
absolutely.
And we'll just kind of walk through it together and break it all down if that sounds like a good plan.
That sounds like hopefully a useful plan for everybody
Okay,
listening.
awesome. All right, let's kick things off with something that every company faces at one point or another: multi year deals. Some love them for predictability, others find them super risky. What's your take?
So this is going to be the first time I say something that I think will come back again and again, but I really love building incentive alignment in different ways between us and a customer, between us and potential partners. So I look for where can where can we both win, and that be the foundation of how we build product and pricing and so forth. And so with respect to multi-year deals right now, I think one thing we've noticed in the enterprise is that there's a latent fear of signing a new deal with a partner that's unknown to them because there's been so much price shock recently. I don't know why. I don't know if price increases have been caused by valuation declines from 2022 on, and so people are trying to catch up. Or if it's a natural economic cycle, I haven't been around doing this long enough to know. But what I do know is that pricing shocks are really hitting customers hard right now. And so I can think of a couple vendors, one that came to multiple of our customers with a 15 times price increase year over year. And so their reaction to that is like, hey, I bought this, I spent time integrating it. Now I just want to rip it out. And I want to displace it. And so then there's a fear of like, if I build a relationship with you, are you going to do that to me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think of, okay, understanding that that is like it's like a recent trauma of sorts to a lot of our
Yeah,
like enterprise customers. What can we do
totally.
about that? And so I think I can do multi-year. I'm not going anywhere. I don't want to have this 15x sort of, I don't want to come back next year with a 15x deal. How can I promise that to you? Part of that's promising, a multi-year deal. What
Hmm.
can I receive in exchange? What's important to me? We say you want 120% net dollar retention. What if we just lock in increases year over year and do a multi-year? So it's comfortable for my business, it's comfortable for your business, and
No
um,
surprises.
and we're both happy.
Hmm.
And so
Cool.
I found it as a way of extending an olive branch to a kind of like scared buying population right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. I don't know if, I think parts of it are post correction. I think a lot of people or a lot of VCs are pushing for more
Yes,
revenue or increased
yes,
revenue. And naturally, unfortunately, sometimes the people that get the brunt of that are the ones that are paying customers already, right?
right,
Um, because then they're already in need, right? Or they're already using
right,
it, so they're the easy target.
yeah.
Um, so I think you're spot on, and I think it's a really smart way to focus on aligning both incentives and making sure that it's more of a longer partnerships, but it's also, yeah, keeping some surprises out of the picture and just allowing things to be consistent. Now, do you think that all companies should push for them, or do you think that it really depends on kind of certain factors like company size or industry or stage of growth that go into play?
I think it depends on the kind of activity you're doing and whether your customer views this as something that is going to be a long-term like activity for them. And I think so for our kind of product, we feel like it's not just a one and done sort of like I'm doing this now, but I'll do something else later. It's this is we're going to shape at least part of our software development lifecycle around the capability that this product has, which implies a long partnership, which in turn, how can we make sure that long partnership is comfortable to embark on in the first place?
Hmm.
I don't know that every product has that characteristic, and so I would. That's the big difference to me. And also, I think what you're hearing is like in another economic cycle in a different world, um, is our incentives may be more aligned to single year deals. So it's very much
Yeah.
situational, I think.
So more of a dynamic pricing model than anything else, and just listening to the market a little bit,
Listening
it
to the
sounds
market.
like.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit more about that strategy. So early on, do you think that a company should have one clear strategy, or do you think it's better to have multiple approaches, especially when targeting large enterprises versus smaller companies?
I believe that you probably need at least two or three different strategies depending on the size of customer. And so one dynamic is with respect to pricing is, do you want a lot of line items in the contract and complex pricing, or do you want few line items and simple pricing? And for a long time, we saw this as an either or proposition.
Mhm.
We should either have simple pricing or complex pricing. And over time, so let's take a simple pricing metric as an example, and one that's for us, it's kind of a fixed platform fee plus a variable component like per developer sort of metric, per contributing developer metric. So you've
Mhm.
got a fixed component, you've got a variable component. Obviously, you're going to wind up with volume discounts on that variable component in one form or another. And
Hmm.
so for a small enough, and by small, I mean, you could even be talking a fairly substantial organization, but one that's say, 3,000 employees,
Sure.
um, that variable metric with some amount of volume discounts is probably still attractive to both parties. When you start getting into large enterprise and you're dealing with tens of thousands of people, um, and whole like trained procurement departments, those procurement departments are like almost like trained to attack that variable metric in a way where you're just going to lose on it. You're going to wind up with what will this cost at full rollout at 60,000 people? um, you give that number, and then suddenly it's like, great, we'll apply that number to 5,000 people now. So, it's like just it's really hard, and if you're not careful, and that curve, like that like variable curve, um, gets too like depressed as volume grows, then you wind up supporting a very complex customer for not much more value than you're achieving out of a much smaller customer. And so while the procurement departments of a large enterprise are like they latch onto those variable metrics and attack them pretty hard. If you if there's other things you can add, like you want advanced firewall configuration, there's a charge for that. You want
Mm.
um, a technical account manager that's ever present in your organization, will add a line item for that. You want
Hmm.
additional capacity, we'll add a line item for that. That actually tends to make them more comfortable.
Mm.
And the perspective of that person, of your company, is that you're more mature.
Hmm.
So the moment we added technical account managers to large enterprise contracts, we had one of our banking customer goes, "Oh, I see. You look like Red Hat now. Now I know, like, it's like relief. Like, now I know how to think about you. I buy
Yeah.
platform, I buy people, and together it makes it hum."
Yeah.
And just like that palpable sense of relief made me think, um, yeah, we clearly need to do a different thing for this kind of customer than we do for others.
Yeah. Makes good sense. I think especially when you're dealing with large enterprises and specifically with customers that are really used to working with larger companies, right? And larger
Yes,
entities that just have a different approach to doing things and a lot more steps involved. And yeah, so it still comes back to the same thing, which is just like mitigate and try and avoid as many surprises as possible. So yeah, okay with additional costs. Just let me know on the front end and explain to me what's
absolutely.
included. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk money, specifically pricing models. Consumption based pricing is a hot topic right now. So I'd love your take. Is it the future or does it only work for certain businesses?
Going back to that incentive alignment piece, one thing I hear a lot, is I want consumption-based pricing at the beginning when I'm unsure of whether I will see substantial consumption.
Mm.
And I want predictable ELA pricing sort of, you know, very shortly thereafter. And so it's like I want consumption based at the beginning. I don't want consumption based at the moment that I've proven the value of the product.
Right.
And so again, this feels like an either or proposition. Do I give them consumption based pricing to accelerate initial land deals at the expense of expansion friction later on, when they want to expand but they can't because the pricing is prohibitive and I don't have the budget for it right now, so I'm going to have to actually attrit usage a little bit in order to keep? Or do I say I'm not offering consumption based pricing at the beginning, and because I'm looking out for your longer term interests, which then adds friction at the front? And so
Right.
it's tempting to think of this as an either or proposition, and um, zero sum game in some respects. And so we find a way to package things in such a way that they kind of get the benefits of both. So for example, we talked about platform fee plus a contributing developer thing. If that's a contributing developer, that's a subscription, it's annualized. Um, it's predictable. It's not consumption based. Those people can do as much work as they wish with the platform. Um, they know how much it's going to cost.
Hmm.
Um, One way of giving them the feeling of early consumption-based pricing is simply to substantially discount or zero out that variable metric in an
Hmm.
initial term. And then, but you've communicated what that price is and what the volume discounts are and what the expectations are about it, so that in that subsequent term, nobody's surprised, and they have the feeling that, okay, now I've proven value. Now I don't have a problem, or
Hmm.
you've looked out for my interests in the longer term deal.
Makes good sense. And then for companies that decide against consumption based pricing, how does that impact the way that they should build their product?
It does vary. You have to be careful about how you think about building product, and are the services that you consume consumption based, first of all. And so obviously we deploy single tenant SaaS oftentimes, and we have an AWS bill, and AWS is fundamentally consumption based on some level.
Hmm.
Um, but do I build my system as one where um, it auto scales with use? Um, if I do, and I've got a very like fixed pricing metric, then my like margin fluctuation can be pretty substantial. Or do I bake in and like scale the solution to the expected max usage at the beginning, like with reserved capacity, and the margin then is fixed and predictable to us, and the pricing is predictable to them. Um, by doing so, like in some ways, running a service in that way means that I will have provisioned and reserved capacity that goes underutilized in periods or is heavily utilized in other periods. But actually, allowing that to be the case simplifies the like scope of things that my engineering team needs to consider.
Hmm.
It goes kind of back to an experience I had at Netflix, which did auto scale quite a bit. They did something called reactive auto scaling at the time, which was, I'm looking at a metric. That metric looks bad for some reason. We're going to add or remove more capacity. They famously had a problem with the Super Bowl. Whenever the Super Bowl would start,
Hmm.
people would just like, this was before they did an international expansion. They would just leave the service in droves. And so, reactive auto scaling, we kind of look around and say like, okay, well, let's just tear down capacity, right? And
Hmm.
then I think when the Super Bowl ended, like people synchronously came back. So they kind of slammed the service all at once, and there's not enough time to react. So there was almost like always an outage around the Super Bowl of some
Hmm.
sort, like a sort of, or like operational degradation at that time. Um, I was, talking to a group from Twitter at one point, and they had mentioned Twitter at the time, yeah, when it was called Twitter. Um, they they said they don't do auto scaling at all, and I
Hmm.
just was so shocked by that. I was thinking, but isn't this just like what at scale tech companies do?
Yeah.
And they said it's actually cheaper for us to run like peak capacity reserve than it is to like reserve something below peak capacity and use on-demand instances into our peak.
Hmm.
And that was like it again, it was kind of a shock. I had gone back to some of the infrastructure people at Netflix, like, why are we doing this? And it's because like off peak, Netflix would use that unused infrastructure to do video encoding,
Hmm.
which is like a really computationally expensive operation, but didn't matter when it happened. And so they had like this internal spot market. And so I think Twitter's argument was like, we just don't have that like massive computational workload to do off cycle. So it's so I guess what I mean is like people tend to design their way into a pricing model as opposed to um, you know engineering simpler to a pricing model.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. We're going to shift gears just a little bit. I want to talk through something that I think a lot of founders struggle with, which is knowing when to fight versus when to back down. And you've said before in previous conversations that, you kind of have to plan to lose sometimes. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you mean by that and share some of your early learnings in this regard?
Absolutely. Plan to lose sounds so negative, but I mean it in a positive way. When you engage, especially in a large enterprise deal, you're going to sign a master services agreement, and then there's going to be an accompanying order form that goes along with that master services agreement that sets the commercial terms. And that master services agreement is going to have paragraphs that cover a wide range of topics from indemnity and limitation of liability to service availability to some things that are a little bit obscure seeming. Like one
Hmm.
we've seen a number of times is code escrow, that we should place our proprietary source code in escrow with a third party in the event that we become insolvent, that our customer is able to retrieve the code from that escrow party and run it on their own.
Hmm.
um, I don't know if that's practical. So you could look at something like that and think, would they, even with the code, would they be able to run it? Um, and obviously, there's a cost to us in sending code to a third party and having to do so regularly, and like, how do we agree on that party? And so it's tempting to just say like, no, let's strike that provision. Let's fight over this, right? And anytime you fight over something like this, you're just going to just drag out the process longer. And it's a continual surprise to me when we hear founders that will let legal review drag on back and forth for extended periods of time, because I promise that's hurting you more than the customer. Um, so we look at clauses like this now. So we used to be very concerned about having clauses like this, and what does it imply to our team if we just accept? What I've noticed is that by first agreeing to the MSA, which may have a clause like code escrow, and then later, after this is signed, go back and consider the order form, there's an opportunity to say on the order form, hey, we can do code escrow like you asked, but it's gonna have an impact on me. So there's a cost associated with that. Put a number on it. Put $100,000 on it. Put whatever number it is, and add that as an additional line item on that contract. And then that gives the buyer an opportunity to say like, but I don't want to pay for that, right?
Mm.
And that's the natural point where we can have this conversation of like, I don't really want to do it either. Like if we can agree that we should just strike
Yeah.
this, then in the order form you just reverse the language that was in the MSA. But the MSA is already
Mm.
signed, it's already done, it's already gone, it's already and so you've just limited the time spent there. So what are the for us the things that are most important? The thing that's most important. I won't, for any procurement people listening, I won't say what all them are, but IP encumbrances are definitely the things that we'll fight on. So if
Hmm.
it's we own everything you've ever produced in perpetuity and every variation on it and every enhancement to it, obviously we can't accept that. But um, there's few things beyond that that I think are existential.
Yeah. Yeah. When you kind of came to this conclusion or came to this thesis of that it's okay to plan to lose every now and again, I'd imagine there were some learnings along the way, or some different opportunities where you felt like maybe you didn't come in with the right mindset per se. Um, Talk to me maybe if you have any examples of times that ultimately helped kind of shape your how you approach deals just more generally and how you come into these types of calls.
I think the outcomes probably haven't been very different in the end.
Hmm.
I think we did often successfully strike the more obscure clauses, but it was more stressful,
More
and
back and forth, more
more back and
stressful.
forth. Um, you just feel like it's unfair potentially, and there's something freeing to just be like, I'm just planning to lose from this clause, this clause, this clause, this clause on the MSA, because I know that later on in the order form we'll just invert it, or
Yeah.
we'll put a charge there. And if they really care about this, um then it then we'll agree to it in some way.
Yeah. So ultimately, through reps and just kind of getting the same repeated back and forth, you came to the conclusion that it's better to just come into these conversations and kind of call out the areas that, you don't really want to budge on or whatever it might be. And then you ultimately end up in a better place or potentially in the same place, but just at a far quicker cycle, it sounds
I
like.
think it's rarely productive, unfortunately, to come in and say the things that you care about the most and are unwilling to budge on. But
Yeah.
um, the but you should know, and for everything else, plan to lose.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Keep everyone's expectations right
Right.
where they should be. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, cool. All right. I think we covered a lot of good stuff on the pricing component. I know that you have successfully sold into six or so out of the 10 largest banks in North America. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, did you have the same kind of strategy going into all of those, being that they're, it's a similar buyer, they're all enterprise buyers, or did you feel like those were pretty dynamic too in the final days of getting them over the finish line?
They're more similar to each other than dissimilar, and
Yeah.
we're not uh, constrained to just banking. So we've seen similar dynamics in retail, healthcare, elsewhere. So it's many of the same points of negotiation from one to the other. We actually have two product tiers. And for the largest enterprise, we know there's an on-prem air gap solution. This is another dynamic, right? And it's a product dynamic. Matt Carbonara from City Ventures has this really great phrase called activation energy. The activation energy needed for a potential buyer to be even willing to go through the process with you.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of ways that we can lower the activation energy as much as possible. So if you're selling a SaaS solution into large enterprise, that can be require higher activation energy.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, curiously, even those large enterprise buyers want a SaaS in many cases. Those things are at odds, right? There was a particular moment where one of these banking customers, I was there talking to one of their managing directors, and this sentence came out of his mouth. Um, I only want to buy SaaS solutions. Let's start on-prem.
Hmm.
Like all one, like unseparated, and it was just like, I appreciate where you're coming from, right? Those things sound
Yeah.
completely contradictory, and I get it because the activation energy to go through cloud security review is brutal.
Yeah.
So, can I deliver a lower tier product on-prem and then, and significantly, make sure that when they do that cloud security review later and transition, that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't represent a replatforming, that they don't have to like start over again
Right.
on the
Right.
onboarding. And if you can do that, then again, aligned incentives, you're able to say, yes, we will provide you a SaaS solution on-prem. I mean,
Yeah.
just it's a matter of when, right? Each of those things
Yeah.
is happening.
Okay, let's reflect on your journey a little bit as a founder. What's one thing that you wish someone would have told you before you got started?
If you're like us, you do need to be prepared and thankful for some degree of rejection. Maybe this is a plan to lose thing again. I hate that this. I hope this doesn't become the thing I'm known for. The that I have seen folks around us, like companies in our same vintage, that had a very easy time raising a seed round for one reason or another because they kind of fit every, checked every box of the cause du jours. For us in 2020, that was, are you a PLG? Are you PLG? Like, is that your
Yeah.
primary motion? And it's probably not going to surprise you that, like, when we're talking about our customer base, it sounds like an enterprise sale, and we always kind of portrayed ourselves that way, and that was not popular in
Hmm.
2020 or
Yeah.
2021. If you really came on strong as an enterprise seller, they just didn't want to hear it. So it was
It was
like,
all
nope,
PLG.
PLG,
Yeah.
yep. And then somewhere around 2022, it like flipped to capital efficient enterprise growth, or not everywhere, but certainly there was a pretty big tone shift
Mm.
there. So um, we took quite a bit of rejection at the beginning, and I think that really helped really sharpen the message and build something a lot more valuable and enduring in the end.
Cool. I love it. Plan to lose. That's it.
I
We're
hate it
gonna
in some ways, but yeah.
it's good though. No, I think
Yeah.
it's like a lot of founders have kind of one motto that they really hold on to, and it resonates across multiple different facets of a business or, day to day. So that's yours. And I think it's great, honestly.
Yeah.
Um
I promise
it's
that isn't our like company cultural statement or anything like that.
Your board members would be
Perfect.
bummed.
That's great. That's right. Wouldn't that be horrible? Um, so speaking of that, to like provide the alternative, like what is the more like the motto, I think.
Yeah.
There's an article from, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago in Harvard Business Review called the Triumph of Humility and Fierce Resolve is a unusual combination.
Mhm.
And I like to think that this that characteristic of humility is actually related to this plan to lose thing. It's like you'll approach customers and try to really understand what their concerns are, what their activation energy is, and just find ways to build towards their needs.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. Okay, we're going to wrap up with a lightning round.
Mm.
So, in basically one or two sentences max, you're going to answer a couple of questions for me, okay?
Okay.
All right. A book, podcast, or resource that you feel every founder should have.
There's books on so many subjects, but the one that we've talked the most today about pricing, I think probably the best book is Confessions of the Pricing Man. So
Cool.
go check that one out. A lot of nuance there.
Awesome. Great.
And for podcasts, of course, never too early.
Thank you. Shameless plug. I appreciate it. Okay, the best piece of advice that you've received to date as a founder.
That you should only accept 50% of the advice that you hear.
I love that.
I do remember, speaking of the rejection sort of thing, I remember having two 30-minute back-to-back calls scheduled with two funds that were telling us why they were going to pass on our seed round. And the first one said, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like, you look like a circle and you should be a square. And I was like, okay, cool. Like take that feedback. And I swear the like second one said, you're a circle, you should be a square. And I was just
Are you
like,
serious?
wow, like that was because of the proximity of them to one another. I mean, I like literally hung up with one and picked up the phone and heard the exact opposite thing. And I
Yeah.
think
You're
that
like,
was
I was
definitely
trying
a
to be a
moment.
circle.
I was trying. I don't even know what I am anymore. And so like it's just uh I mean, there's great advice out there, but there's a lot of that too.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's super helpful. I think that a lot of times when you're a founder, a lot of people want to help and a lot of people have a lot of opinions,
And they're going to form
perspectives.
opinions about you quickly, right?
Yes.
Which it's just the nature of that. You can only know
Hmm.
somebody so well in a quick period of time.
Totally. So you take it with a grain of salt and
Hmm.
do what you feel is best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Jonathan, where can listeners find out more about you or Moderne? Where can they reach out if they have questions or additional things they want to run by you?
Absolutely. So I hang out on LinkedIn like every enterprise B2B seller probably. So I'm easy to find there. You can check out Moderne at moderne.ai.
Amazing. Cool. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This has been incredibly helpful. It's a topic that's been coming up more and more as of late. And I think that your wisdom is incredibly timely and super, super helpful. So thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining me. I appreciate it. Thanks for the candor. Thanks for the fun. And we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thanks, Lauren.
All right. And thank you all for listening to Never Too Early. More to come soon.